Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video. So this is the first video I will be putting up in 2018. So I hope everyone is looking forward to having a great year. Hopefully we'll get lots and lots of tactical stuff done and we'll be able to cover all the different Warhammery shenanigans that will be going on, no doubt, in 8th edition. But for now it is business as usual. So I've done a big load of recording and I'm going to be releasing lots and lots of tactics videos coming up this week, and if I've had chance I'll be uploading some battle reports as well. But for now, let's keep it simple. Let's start off the year on a good note and let's just do a tactical video, the good old-fashioned Mordian glory formula. So today's video we're going to be looking at a concept which I have been experiencing quite a lot in 8th edition, which is this concept of building and evolving a list. So if you go out there onto YouTube or onto the internet, there'll be loads and loads of advice of how to build a list, and it's fairly simple stuff, you know. Take a balance of units, don't focus just on one thing. It's okay to have a theme, but you've got to cover all your bases. Make sure you've got some heavy support units, some close combat units, some shooting units, you know, just some commanders. Don't just go all commanders, don't just go all tanks. Have a nice mix, a nice balance, because a balanced take-all-comers list is what 8th edition is all about, and that is why Imperial Guard have been so successful, because we've been building these take-all-comers lists for years and years and years now. We're not like other armies where we had our gimmicks like Wolfstar or Skyhammer or Gladius. No. We have always built take-all-comers lists. So you guys already know how to build a balanced Imperial Guard list. I've banged on about it. You know, if you're going for a take-all-comers hybrid list, you go for, you know, you start off and you throw 100 infantry onto the table. Doesn't matter. You've just got to have 100 line infantry. Won't cost you that much, minimum of 400 points. You throw some upgrades on there, it'll cost you about 600 points. That's the good starting core for your list. Then you add in enough officers to give them orders. Then you add in some heavy support things like Leman Russes, Wyverns, Bastards, you know, stuff to break the enemy toys, because your infantry are there to hold the line, to die for the Emperor, but most importantly to go for the objectives. And they're the sort of game players. They play to the game, they play to the mission. And then you need your toy breakers, which are your things like your your Leman Russes, your Manticores, Stormtroopers, stuff like that. So I've already banged on about that. That's a concept we're all familiar with. But there's this next level to it, and I think this is a level which is I don't think I've ever seen it covered in detail on YouTube. Okay, maybe I'm wrong, but it's this concept that I've nicknamed Distillation. So if you remember, I did a video. I try and use these sort of scientific words to describe concept of Warhammer. So if you remember, I did my video on homogenization. Well, this is the video that I'm calling Distillation. This is a concept I'm calling Distillation. Now maybe that's not the right term for it, but what I mean by that is when you sort of distill something, you're purifying it. You're distilling out the unwanted. You're separating out the unwanted elements and you're being left with the pure product. Okay? This concept is something you want to apply to your Warhammer list. So, I will use a real life example so you guys understand what I mean. When building my Steel Legion, what I did is I sat down and I wrote a list on paper, a theory craft list, and I based it on elements. I built my list based on theoretical good unit choices. So I had infantry squads in chimeras, and I was giving those chimeras things like heavy flamers and multi-lasers, because that was a good balance. And then I was putting heavy weapons on the infantry squads, because in theory what I wanted to do is to have my infantry start outside of the chimeras so they can use those heavy weapons and they can mount back up, and you know, that's fine. That was sort of the concept I have. I wanted heavy weapons on my infantry squads. I wanted heavy flamers on my chimeras. I wanted my sentinels to be as cheap as possible. I wasn't interested in the sentinels. And I wanted my tanks to be exterminator tanks. I wanted autocannons. I wanted to really spam autocannons. And I played this list a few times and it wasn't working. But what I could see was the core concept of the list, the 6 squads in the Chimeras, the Sentinels, the Lean Russes. I could see the core concept of the list was working, but there were some unwanted elements, some impurities, if you will. There were some bad weapon choices in that list. So so the unit combinations were working, but the weapon choices weren't. So I went away and I made some changes, and I kept the heavy weapons in the infantry squads, and I kept the Sentinels as cheap as possible. But I then took different Lehman Russ variants, and it got better, and I thought I did much better in my next couple of games, and I won my first game with Steel Legionists, and I thought that's good. I can see that the Lehman Russes are now doing better. I've switched from exterminators to battle cannons, and plasma. You know, I've gone for those I've got rid of the battle cannons. They weren't. They've got rid of the exterminators. They weren't doing it. I need to take some heavier hitting weapons. What I was finding is by having these heavier hitting weapons, like my battle cannons and my plasma cannon sponsons and my plasma Lehman Russes, what I was finding is I was sort of lacking in anti-horde, because I had lots of high damage weapons but not really a high volume of shots. So I had to go away, and what I did is I went away and I was like, right, got to distill the next level, got to continue the distillation process. There's more unwanted elements, there's more impurities in my list, which aren't pulling their weight. And I was like, right, let's switch, because I did a lot of proxying, you see, when playtesting my list. Let's switch from heavy flamers and multi-lasers, and let's instead go for maximum DACA output. So I went for heavy stubbers, heavy bolters, and heavy bolters. And that worked. And what I was finding was my Chimeras were able to deal a lot of the anti-infantry stuff, and my tanks were able to damage a lot of the enemy toys. But there still was a couple of things that weren't quite working. The first one was the heavy weapons on the infantry squads. I realised that my initial plan for the army had always been deploy the infantry out front, they can absorb some damage, and then they can jump back in. Now, in theory, that sounded like a sound tactic, but I was thinking like an infantry commander, where I could afford to lose 40 infantry in a turn. As a mechanised commander with my Steel Legion list, I couldn't afford to lose that infantry. And it was coming around to bite me in the ass, and I was needing those infantry later on, and I was losing objective-based games, because I didn't have any OBSEC left over, or I had very little OBSEC left over, you know. So, and I found that I was keeping my infantry in the Chimeras more and more often, and then at the final sort of few turns, splurging them onto objectives. You know, dumping 30 men on each objective, and that was working a lot better. But then I realised I wasn't using the heavy weapons in the infantry squads. I had 3 heavy bolters and 3 missile launchers, which weren't doing anything. And that's 60 points to the missile launchers and 24 points to the heavy bolters. That's 84 points of just waste. 84 points of impurities. So then I was like, right, drop those, and I can use those points elsewhere. And the second thing, the final thing that I noticed about the list, that the final level of distillation to get the list as pure as possible, was my Sentinels. I was taking, and I've done a video on this about Scout Sentinels and Armed Sentinels, but I'm going to keep this short. Basically, every game I was finding that my Scout Sentinels were just dying, and they weren't doing anything. And I tried putting heavy flamers on them, but they just weren't doing it. My opponents were just shooting them, because 8th edition is still a shooting game. There are close combat armies out there that can work. There are. But 8th edition is still primarily 75% shooting, 25% combat, in terms of the armies that you face. You know, I've come across orc gun lines. That shows you how shooting 8th edition is. So, what I did is, I was like, right, I'm going to take the Sentinels, I'm going to make them work. Right now, I'm spending 45 points on them, on each Sentinel. That's 135 points. That's 135 wasted points. Those Sentinels need to do stuff. So I switched them up to Armoured Sentinels, and I gave them better weapons. I gave them las cannons. Now, that immediately made them more survivable. They could still be thrown out front if they needed to be to do the Scout Sentinel role, but they were more survivable with the extra toughness, the extra armor save, and more importantly, those las cannons were doing damage. They were doing lots and lots of damage. And then I took that list. It's my final iteration. So we had heavy bolter chimeras, we had plasma battle cannon Liebenmusses, we had just basically just bare bones infantry squads with just a bolter and a plasma gun in them, no heavy weapons, and we had armoured sentinels. And the list came together. It clicked. It finally clicked, and all the elements worked together. We had the heavy weapons on the tanks and the sentinels. We had the Dakka and anti-infantry on the chimeras and the infantry squads. And it just worked. And since then, my Steel Legion list has been going from strength to strength. It has, in its final iteration, it has not lost a game. I played a game on Tuesday of this week, date being Thursday, the 28th, and I faced off against the Dreadnought list, and I didn't lose a single model. My list was just able to take so much punishment, and it was just able to deal so much damage, and my opponent didn't kill anything. Very frustrating game for my opponent. I was, apologetic at the end, because obviously it was a bit of a boring game, but that's beside the point. The point of it is that all the elements came together. The distillation process took me, 6 months? How long have I been doing the Steel Legion thing for now? 6 months? Maybe 4 months? Point is, it's taken me 4 months of playing games every week with my Steel Legion. Just distillation. And what I do is, I would play 3 or 4 games, make a small change. Play 3 or 4 games, make a small change. What's really important with this distillation process, and it's something I want to highlight, is that you can overdo it. You can play a game and go, that's not working, and get rid of it. But what if you're wrong? What if you were just unlucky with that certain weapon that game? What if you were firing your armor sentinels every turn with the las cannons and they just weren't hitting anything, but then the next game you use them, they do fine, you just had a bad streak of luck? It's very important to not make a change until you're absolutely sure it's the right thing to do. I would generally recommend playing a minimum of 2 to 3 games with a certain list, with a certain loadout, before changing. Okay? That's my advice. So, basically, distillation, this process of putting down a list on paper and then playing it and playing it and playing it and tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it and refining it and purifying it until you have this perfect product at the end, this perfect list that has all the right balances. And if you can, what's important, if you can have a few fun options in there, then that's great. I mean, this is 8th edition. There's always a few points left over for fun. For example, I've taken a couple of power swords and bolt pistols on my officers. That's about 10 points. I couldn't really spend that 10 points anywhere else, so I was fine to spend it on power swords and bolt pistols for my officers. But if I had to, I could distill the list down even further, get rid of those things, get those extra 10 points and spend them elsewhere. But I've actually found, as I've said to you guys, it's okay to have a few hidden power weapons here and there. It's actually a good thing to have hidden power weapons. It allows you to, sometimes a power weapon is all you need to swing a combat into your favour. So, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope this concept, you've understood it. I hope it's clear. If you've got any questions, of course, leave lots and lots of comments. And I'll see you guys next time.